The whispers of tropic, Utah carried on the warm summer breeze like tumbleweeds, harsh and relentless as they surrounded Olivia Olsen and the small bundle cradled in her arms. At 22, with no husband and a newborn daughter, she had become the town's favorite cautionary tale. The year was 1883, and in this small settlement nestled beneath the red cliffs, a woman alone with a child was considered little more than a tragedy waiting to unfold. "You'll never manage," Mrs. Perkins had told her just yesterday outside the general store, not bothering to lower her voice. "A woman like you has no business raising a child." Olivia had pressed her lips together until they turned white, refusing to give the woman the satisfaction of a response. She knew what "a woman like you" meant: unmarried, working as a laundress, living in a one-room cabin on the edge of town. The fact that she'd shown up in Tropic 8 months pregnant and alone had cemented her reputation, before she'd even had a chance to introduce herself properly. Now, as she walked down the dusty main street, her daughter Emma whimpering softly against her chest, Olivia felt the stares burning into her back. She tightened her shawl around the baby and quickened her pace. The basket of mending she carried in her other hand was nearly empty. Folks were starting to refuse her work. Without those coins, she wouldn't make rent on the cabin come month's end. "Miss Olsen," the voice stopped her in her tracks. Deep, unfamiliar but not unkind. Olivia turned slowly, adjusting Emma in her arms as she did. The man approaching her was tall, his shoulders broad beneath a faded blue shirt. Dust covered his boots and the lower half of his denims, suggesting he'd ridden into town recently. His face was sun-bronzed, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of smiling more often than frowning. A black hat sat atop dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Xavier Lockwood," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "I believe you do mending." Olivia nodded cautiously. "I do, Mr. Lockwood. Call me Zav. Everyone does." His smile was easy, genuine in a way that made her wary. Men with smiles like that usually wanted something. "I've just bought the old Fletcher place outside town. Could use someone to patch up some curtains, maybe do a bit of sewing." Emma chose that moment to let out a wail. Olivia shifted her weight, bouncing gently to soothe the infant. "Pretty little one," Xavier remarked, peering down at Emma's red face. "What's her name?" "Emma," Olivia replied, surprised he'd asked. Most folks in town acted as if the baby was invisible or worse, a blight. "Good, strong name." He nodded approvingly. "Now about that sewing." "I can take on the work," Olivia said quickly, perhaps too eagerly. "When would you need it done?" "No rush. I'll bring the items by your place tomorrow if that suits." Before Olivia could respond, a sharp voice cut through their conversation. "Mr. Lockwood, I see you've met our town's unfortunate situation." Harriet Walsh, the mayor's wife, glided toward them. Her perfect posture and immaculate dress a stark contrast to Olivia's worn gown and tired eyes. Xavier's eyebrows rose slightly. "Pardon." Mrs. Walsh's smile was thin as a knife's edge. "Miss Olsen is—" "Well, let's just say her situation is regrettable. If you're looking for proper household help, I can recommend several respectable women." Olivia's cheeks burned. She wanted to disappear, to run back to her cabin and hide, but her feet remained rooted to the spot. Xavier's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing slightly as he regarded Mrs. Walsh. "I appreciate your concern, madam, but I've already engaged Miss Olsen's services. I feel it's my duty to inform newcomers about certain elements in our community," Mrs. Walsh persisted. "A woman who cannot conduct herself properly can hardly be expected to fulfill professional obligations. And as for motherhood—" Her gaze flicked dismissively to Emma. "The poor child would be better served in a proper home." Olivia felt as if she'd been slapped. This wasn't the first time someone had suggested, sometimes not so subtly, that she should give up her daughter, that she wasn't fit to be a mother. "Is that right?" Xavier's voice had cooled considerably. He turned to Olivia, studying her face and the careful way she held her child despite her trembling hands. Then, he did something that stunned both women. He smiled broadly and said, loud enough for passers-by to hear, "Then I'll prove them wrong with you, Miss Olsen." He tipped his hat to a speechless Mrs. Walsh. "Good day, madam." Turning back to Olivia, he lowered his voice. "I'll come by tomorrow with those curtains, and perhaps you might consider a more permanent position. My place needs a woman's touch, and I could use the help." Before Olivia could gather her wits to respond, he gave a slight bow and strode away, leaving her standing in the street with Emma, who had miraculously quieted during the exchange. Mrs. Walsh sniffed loudly. "Disgraceful," she muttered before sweeping away, her skirts swishing angrily in the dust. Olivia stood frozen for several moments, uncertain what had just happened. Had a stranger, a handsome one at that, just defended her? Had he just offered her work when others were turning her away? It seemed too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Men had ulterior motives. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. Still, as she made her way back to her small cabin, she found herself watching the road that led out of town, wondering about Xavier Lockwood and whether he would actually appear the next day as promised. The cabin was stifling when Olivia returned. The late afternoon sun beat down on the wooden structure, turning it into an oven. She laid Emma down in the cradle she'd fashioned from a large wooden box, placing it in the shadiest corner before opening the single window as wide as it would go. She moved to the small stove, stirring the pot of beans that would serve as her dinner. As she worked, her mind kept returning to Xavier Lockwood. There was something in his eyes, a directness, a clarity that made her uncomfortable. Not because it was threatening, but because it had been so long since anyone had truly looked at her, rather than through her or away from her in embarrassment. And what had he meant by proving them wrong? Was it just something to say in the moment to put Mrs. Walsh in her place? Or did he genuinely believe Olivia could be a good mother? At night, as she lay on her narrow bed with Emma sleeping beside her, Olivia allowed herself to imagine a life where she wasn't constantly judged, where her daughter wouldn't grow up bearing the weight of her mother's supposed sins. It was a dangerous kind of hope, the sort that had led her astray before. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help but wonder if Xavier Lockwood might be different from the other men she'd known. Morning came with a burst of golden light through the open window, and Emma's hungry cries. Olivia nursed her daughter, humming softly as she did. The simple, peaceful moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Her heart leaped to her throat. It was early still, not yet 8 o'clock. She hastily adjusted her clothing and moved to the door, Emma still in her arms. Xavier Lockwood stood on her doorstep, hat in hand. Behind him, a wagon waited, loaded with what appeared to be bolts of fabric. "Good morning, Miss Olsen," he said, his eyes briefly taking in the cabin behind her. If he was judging her modest accommodations, his face gave nothing away. "Mr. Lockwood," she replied, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and hastily pinned hair. "I wasn't expecting you so early." "The day starts at dawn on a ranch," he said with a slight smile. "And please, it's Xav." Olivia hesitated, then nodded. Would you like to come in?" "I could make coffee." "That would be welcome, thank you." She stepped back to allow him entry, watching as he ducked his head slightly to clear the doorframe. The cabin seemed to shrink with his presence, though he moved carefully, respectfully, as if conscious of invading her space. "You have a nice place here," he said, settling his large frame onto the only chair at her small table. Olivia nearly laughed at the polite lie. The cabin was clean but spare, with a bed, a table, a stove and little else. It serves its purpose, she replied, moving to the stove to start the coffee. This must be quite a change from what you were used to, he remarked, watching as she worked one-handed, Emma still nestled against her shoulder. Olivia stiffened. What makes you think I was used to better? Your speech, the way you carry yourself, the books. He nodded toward the small shelf where she kept her precious collection Shakespeare Austen, a volume of Tennyson's poems. Not typical for a laundress. She poured water into the coffee pot before responding. My father was a schoolteacher in Pennsylvania. He believed in education for both his sons and his daughter. A forward-thinking man, he was. Olivia's throat tightened as she thought of her father who had died 2 years earlier. Would he be ashamed of her now? She hoped not. Despite everything, she tried to live by his principles of honesty and hard work. And what brought you to Tropic? Xavier asked, his tone casual. Olivia set the coffee to boil before turning to face him. Mr. Lockwood, Xav, he corrected gently. Xav, she conceded. I appreciate the work you're offering, but I should make something clear. Whatever you might have heard about me, whatever you might think about a woman in my situation, I am not available for certain kinds of arrangements. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. Miss Olsen, if I've given you the impression that I'm offering anything improper, I sincerely apologize. Then what exactly are you offering? Olivia asked bluntly. Because your words yesterday about proving them wrong with me, I don't understand your meaning or your interest in my situation. Xavier leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I meant exactly what I said. This town has judged you unfairly, based on what little they know of your circumstances. I'm offering you honest work, nothing more. And why would you do that when everyone else is turning me away? A shadow passed across his face. Let's just say I know something about being judged without cause. Emma began to fuss, and Olivia bounced her gently, making soft, shushing sounds. Xavier watched them for a moment, his expression softening. She has your eyes, he observed. Olivia looked down at her daughter's face. Yes, she does. The coffee pot began to bubble, and she moved to take it off the heat, carefully pouring 2 cups. She handed one to Xavier before settling on the edge of her bed, the only other place to sit. So tell me about this work, she said, shifting Emma to her other shoulder. I need curtains for the main house 6 windows, the fabrics in the wagon, and some repairs to linens. But more importantly, I need someone to help put the house in order. It's been empty for years, and while the structure is sound, it needs a thorough cleaning and organizing. And you'd trust me to do that? Olivia couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Xavier sipped his coffee before answering. Miss Olsen, I've been watching folks in this town for the past week, trying to get a sense of who's who. And what I've observed is that despite the gossip and cold shoulders, you hold your head high, care for your child, and continue your work with dignity. That tells me far more about your character than any rumors could. Warmth spread through Olivia's chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. It had been so long since anyone had seen her, truly seen her, rather than the scandal she represented. How long would the work last? She asked. A month, perhaps longer. I've purchased 800 acres with plans to raise cattle. Getting established will take time, and I'll need help through that process. Olivia hesitated. I can't leave Emma. I wouldn't ask you to, Xavier replied immediately. She'd come with you, of course. There's a small cabin on the property, separate from the main house but close enough. It would be yours while you work for me. It sounded too good to be true. A job, a place to stay away from the judging eyes of Tropic, the chance to start fresh where her past wasn't constantly thrown in her face. What about when word gets around town? Olivia asked. People will talk. Xavier's smile was grim. Let them. I'm not much concerned with the opinions of folks who'd condemn a woman for trying to make a life for herself and her child." Olivia studied him, searching for signs of deception or ulterior motives, but found only sincerity in his steady gaze. "When would you need me to start?" she asked finally. "How soon can you be ready?" Olivia glanced around the small cabin. There wasn't much to pack or leave behind. "Tomorrow," she decided. "I can be ready tomorrow." Xavier nodded, setting down his empty cup as he rose. "I'll come for you at 9, and Miss Olsen." "Yes, thank you for trusting me. I know it can't be easy given your experiences." As he left, tipping his hat once more before mounting his wagon, Olivia stood in the doorway watching until the dust settled behind him. Emma cooed in her arms, reaching up to grab a strand of Olivia's hair. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Are we making a terrible mistake, or could this be our chance?" Emma's only answer was a gummy smile, but somehow it was enough. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Olivia had spent the previous day settling her affairs in Tropic, paying what she owed at the general store, informing her landlord she was leaving, gathering the few possessions she wanted to take with her. The task had been completed quicker than expected. Another reminder of how little connection she had formed with the town in the 8 months she'd lived there. By 8:30, she was dressed in her best gown, a faded blue calico with only one mended tear at the sleeve, and had packed her clothing, books, and Emma's things into a single trunk. The baby was fed and content. Dressed in the white gown Olivia had lovingly embroidered during her pregnancy. As the clock neared 9, Olivia felt a flutter of anxiety. What if Xavier didn't come? What if this was some elaborate joke at her expense? It wouldn't be the first time a man had made promises he never intended to keep. But at precisely 9 o'clock, the sound of wagon wheels drew her to the window. Xavier pulled up outside, his wagon empty save for a rocking chair secured in the back. He jumped down and approached her door, knocking lightly. "Good morning, Miss Olsen," he greeted her, removing his hat. "Ready to depart?" "Yes," she replied, gesturing to her trunk. "This is everything." Xavier nodded, lifting the trunk effortlessly. "I'll secure this, then help you and Emma aboard." As he loaded her trunk, Olivia took one last look around the cabin. Despite its simplicity, it had been a refuge of sorts, the first place she'd lived alone with her daughter. She felt an unexpected pang at leaving it behind. "Miss Olsen," Xavier called from outside. "Coming," she replied, gathering Emma and the small basket containing her immediate necessities. Xavier helped her onto the wagon seat, making sure she and Emma were settled before climbing up beside her. "I noticed you don't have a proper traveling chair for the little one," he said, gesturing to the rocking chair in the back. "Thought this might make the journey more comfortable for both of you." Olivia was touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Mr. Zav." He smiled at her use of his preferred name. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch. The road gets a bit rough in places, but we'll take it slow." As they pulled away, Olivia couldn't help glancing back at Tropic. Several figures stood watching their departure, Mrs. Walsh among them, her mouth set in a thin line of disapproval. Xavier followed her gaze. "Having second thoughts?" "No," Olivia said firmly, turning her back on the town. "Not at all." The journey passed pleasantly, with Xavier pointing out landmarks and sharing his plans for the ranch. Emma slept soundly in Olivia's arms, lulled by the gentle rocking of the wagon. "May I ask you something?" Olivia ventured as they crested a hill. "Of course." "What made you buy land here? You don't seem like the typical settler." Xavier's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "My father was a rancher in Texas. I grew up learning the trade, but circumstances changed. I spent some years doing other work, saved enough to start my own place. The land here was available at a good price. What other work? Olivia asked, curious about the man who had so unexpectedly changed her circumstances. A slight smile touched his lips. I rode with the Pony Express for a time, then scouted for the army. Most recently, I worked as a lawman in Colorado. A lawman? Olivia couldn't hide her surprise. Deputy sheriff in a mining town called Silverton. His expression darkened slightly. Saw enough there to last a lifetime. Decided it was time to return to something I understood: raising cattle, working the land. Before Olivia could ask more, Xavier pointed ahead. There it is, the Fletcher place. My place now, I suppose. Olivia followed his gaze to where the land dipped into a small valley. A two-story house stood nestled against a backdrop of red cliffs, with several outbuildings scattered nearby. A creek ran along one edge of the property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. It's beautiful, she murmured. It needs work, Xavier replied, but it has good bones. The land's fertile, with plenty of water. Old Fletcher knew what he was doing when he settled here. As they drew closer, Olivia could see that the house, while solidly built, showed signs of neglect. Paint peeled from the wooden siding and several shutters hung askew. The front porch sagged slightly in one corner. I've already fixed up the inside enough to be livable, Xavier explained as he guided the wagon toward the house. But there's plenty still to do. He pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down, coming around to help Olivia descend. As her feet touched the ground, Emma woke, blinking up at the new surroundings. "Welcome to your new home, little one," Xavier said softly, then cleared his throat as if embarrassed by the sentiment. "Let me show you to the cabin, Miss Olsen. Then I can bring your things." The cabin he led them to sat about 50 yards from the main house, a snug, one-room structure with a small covered porch. Inside was simple but clean, with a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a small stove. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, and a vase of wildflowers sat on the table. "I hope it's suitable," Xavier said, watching her reaction carefully. "I put clean linens on the bed yesterday." Olivia turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. It was larger than her cabin in Tropic and somehow more welcoming despite its simplicity. "It's perfect," she said honestly. "Thank you. Good," he nodded, seeming pleased. "I'll fetch your trunk and the rocker. Take your time settling in. We can discuss your duties tomorrow." Left alone in the cabin, Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, Emma cradled in her lap. "Well, my love," she whispered, "it seems we've found a new start." The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Olivia threw herself into the work with determination, grateful for the chance to prove her worth. She began with the curtains Xavier had requested, measuring the windows and cutting the fabric with precision. Between sewing sessions, she tackled the cleaning of the main house, starting with the kitchen and working her way through the downstairs rooms. Xavier proved to be a considerate employer. He made himself scarce when she was working in the house, focusing on outdoor chores and repairs. He insisted she take regular breaks to tend to Emma, and never complained when the baby's needs interrupted a task. By the end of the first week, Olivia had established a comfortable routine. She would arrive at the main house after breakfast, Emma in tow, and work until mid-afternoon. Xavier would often prepare a simple lunch for them both, which they ate at the kitchen table, discussing the day's tasks and gradually learning more about each other. It was during one such lunch that Olivia finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since their first meeting. "Why did you really hire me, Xav?" she asked as they shared a meal of beans and cornbread. "There must have been other women in town who needed work, women without the complications I bring." Xavier set down his fork, considering her question. "Do you know what I saw when I first spotted you in town, Olivia?" It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it caught her by surprise. "What?" "I saw a woman standing straight and tall despite the weight on her shoulders. I saw someone who refused to be beaten down by circumstance or judgment." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "I saw courage." Olivia lowered her gaze, unused to such direct praise. "Most would call it foolishness or pride. Most don't know the difference between pride and dignity." Xavier leaned forward slightly. "You remind me of someone I knew once, someone who faced impossible choices with the same quiet strength." "Who?" Olivia asked softly. A shadow crossed his face. "My sister Rebecca. She found herself in a situation not unlike yours many years ago." "What happened to her?" "She died," he said simply, the words falling like stones. "Childbirth fever took her and her baby boy. She was 19. "I'm sorry," Olivia whispered, understanding dawning. "Is that why you helped me?" "Because of her, partly," Xavier admitted. "But it's more than that. The way this town treats you, it's not right. What happened between you and the father of your child is your business, not theirs to judge." Olivia looked down at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in a basket nearby. "His name was William," she said quietly. "He was the son of my father's colleague at the school. He promised marriage, then disappeared when I told him about the baby. By then, my father had died, and I had nowhere to go." "So you came west?" She nodded. "As far as my money would take me, I thought. In a new place I could start fresh, that people might not ask too many questions." "Small towns run on questions," Xavier said with a wry smile, "and answers they make up when none are provided." "I've learned that," Olivia agreed, attempting to match his lighter tone. "Though I admit I never expected to find an ally here." "Well," Xavier said, rising to clear their plates, "now you have one." As the days turned into weeks, the Fletcher ranch began to transform under their combined efforts. Xavier focused on the exterior repairs and the outbuildings, while Olivia brought the interior back to life. The curtains she'd sewn hung proudly at each window, and she'd discovered a talent for furniture arrangement that made the large rooms feel both spacious and inviting. Emma thrived in the new environment, growing plumper and more alert with each passing day. She had begun to recognize Xavier, cooing happily whenever he appeared. To Olivia's surprise, he showed a natural ease with the baby, often holding her while Olivia completed tasks that required both hands. "You're good with her," Olivia remarked one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house. The summer twilight stretched long and golden across the valley, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. Xavier glanced down at Emma, who had fallen asleep against his chest. "She makes it easy," he said softly. "She's a good-natured little thing. Still, not many men would be so comfortable with an infant. I helped raise my younger brothers after our mother died," he explained. "Got used to having little ones underfoot. Where are they now, your brothers?" "Thomas runs a store in Denver. Samuel joined the army. Last I heard he was stationed at Fort Laramie." Pride colored his voice as he spoke of them. "Good men, both of them." "They had a good example," Olivia observed. Xavier's eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. "I did what needed doing, that's all. That's more than many would do." A comfortable silence fell between them as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Olivia was struck by how peaceful she felt in this moment, how far removed from the constant tension that had marked her days in Tropic. "We should ride into town tomorrow," Xavier said suddenly. "Pick up supplies and mail." Olivia stiffened slightly. "I can stay here if you prefer. Continue working on the pantry shelves. You've been working non-stop for nearly 3 weeks," he pointed out. "And Emma could use some things from the store, couldn't she?" It was true that they needed supplies, but the thought of facing the townsfolk again made Olivia's stomach tighten with anxiety. People will talk if we arrive together. Let them, Xavier said firmly. You work for me. There's nothing improper about it. And frankly, I could use your help selecting fabric for the bedroom curtains. I haven't the first idea about such things. Olivia couldn't help but smile at his transparent attempt to provide a legitimate reason for her presence. Very well, she conceded. But don't say I didn't warn you about the gossip mill. Duly noted, he replied with a small grin. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Olivia dressed carefully in her blue gown, which she had recently mended and refreshed with new collar and cuffs. She pinned her honey-brown hair into a neat bun and added a simple bonnet she had trimmed with a ribbon saved from her mother's things. Emma was unusually fussy, as if sensing her mother's nervousness about the upcoming trip. It took longer than usual to feed and dress her, and by the time Olivia emerged from the cabin, Xavier was already waiting with the wagon. Sorry to keep you waiting, Olivia apologized, hurrying toward him with Emma in one arm and the baby's basket in the other. No need for apologies, Xavier assured her, taking the basket and helping her up. We're in no rush. The journey to town was pleasant, with Xavier pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his travels. By the time Tropic came into view, Olivia's anxiety had eased somewhat, though it returned as they drove down the main street. Heads turned as they passed, and whispers followed in their wake. Xavier seemed oblivious, or perhaps simply unconcerned, as he pulled the wagon to a stop outside the general store. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to help her down. Olivia nodded, adjusting Emma in her arms as she stepped onto the boardwalk. The store's bell jingled as Xavier held the door for her, announcing their arrival to everyone inside. The conversation that had been flowing stopped abruptly. Mrs. Perkins and Mrs. Walsh stood near the fabric counter, their expressions shifting from surprise to disapproval as they spotted Olivia. The storekeeper, Mr. Finch, recovered first, his merchant's instinct for profit overriding any personal opinions. "Mr. Lockwood, good to see you," he called. "What can I help you with today?" "Quite a list," Xavier replied easily, producing a paper from his pocket. "Miss Olsen will be selecting fabric for curtains while you and I go through these other items." Olivia moved toward the fabric display, conscious of the women's eyes following her. She focused on examining the bolts of cloth, trying to ignore the whispers that weren't quite soft enough to miss. Living out there together, bold as brass. That poor child growing up in such circumstances. Wouldn't be surprised if there's another on the way before winter. Olivia's cheeks burned, but she kept her head high, selecting a cheerful yellow calico that would brighten the bedrooms upstairs. She was measuring out the required length when Mrs. Walsh approached, a saccharine smile fixed on her face. "Miss Olsen, what an unexpected pleasure to see you in town." "Mrs. Walsh," Olivia acknowledged with a nod, continuing her task. "We had heard you'd taken a position at the old Fletcher place with Mr. Lockwood." The emphasis made the implication clear. "Yes, I'm helping to restore the house," Olivia replied evenly. Mrs. Walsh leaned closer, lowering her voice to a stage whisper. "My dear, I feel compelled to speak plainly out of concern for your welfare. Your reputation is already compromised. Living alone with a single man, regardless of your supposed employment, can only lead to further difficulties." Olivia set down the scissors she'd been using. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Walsh, but I assure you, my arrangement with Mr. Lockwood is entirely professional." "Of course you would say that," Mrs. Walsh replied with a condescending pat on Olivia's arm. "But consider what example you're setting for your daughter. Surely you want better for her than to follow in your footsteps." Before Olivia could respond, Xavier appeared beside her, his expression pleasantly neutral though his eyes were hard. "Mrs. Walsh, good day to you," he said, tipping his hat. "I see you've been keeping Miss Olsen company while I settled the bill." Mrs. Walsh's smile became strained. "Indeed, Mr. Lockwood. I was just expressing my concerns about Miss Olsen's living situation." "How thoughtful," Xavier replied, his tone making it clear he thought it was anything but. "However, I can assure you that Miss Olsen's reputation is in no danger under my roof. She has her own quarters, separate from the main house, and her work is valued and respected." Mrs. Walsh's lips thinned. "Mr. Lockwood, while your intentions may be honorable, you must understand how such arrangements appear to decent folk." "What I understand," Xavier said, his voice dropping slightly, "is that decent folk often hide their own shortcomings by scrutinizing others. Miss Olsen is a hard-working woman raising her child as best she can. Any who would condemn her for that might want to examine their own Christian charity." A hush had fallen over the store. Mrs. Walsh's face flushed dark red and she drew herself up to her full height. "Well, I never. Perhaps that's the problem," Xavier suggested mildly. "Olivia, have you finished selecting the fabric? We should be on our way." Olivia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She gathered Emma closer as Xavier paid Mr. Finch for the fabric and guided her toward the door with a gentle hand at her elbow. As they stepped back onto the boardwalk, Olivia released a shaky breath. "You shouldn't have done that." "Done what?" Xavier asked, helping her into the wagon. "Defended me like that," challenged Mrs. Walsh. "She's the mayor's wife. She has influence in this town. And I'm a landowner who'll be bringing business to this town for years to come," Xavier countered, climbing up beside her. "Her influence only extends as far as people allow it to." As he flicked the reins and the wagon began to move, Olivia glanced back to see Mrs. Walsh and several others watching them from the store window, their expressions ranging from shock to outrage. "They'll only talk more now," she said quietly. Xavier's jaw was set, his profile stern against the afternoon sun. "Let them talk. Words can only hurt if you give them power." Olivia considered this as they left the town behind, the road stretching ahead toward the ranch toward home, she realized with surprise. In just 3 weeks, she had come to think of the Fletcher place as home in a way Tropic had never been. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely audible above the creak of wagon wheels. Xavier glanced at her, his expression softening. "For what?" "For standing up for me. No one's done that in a very long time." He was quiet for a moment, his eyes returning to the road. "You deserve better than their judgment, Olivia. You and Emma both." The words settled around her like a blanket, warm and comforting. For the first time since learning she was with child, Olivia felt a fragile hope unfurling in her chest, hope that perhaps she wasn't alone after all. The confrontation in town marked a turning point in Olivia's relationship with Xavier. Something had shifted between them, a new understanding taking root. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural, sharing meals, discussing plans for the ranch, and watching Emma grow more alert and engaged with her surroundings. It was late August now, and the days had begun to show hints of autumn's approach. The morning air held a crispness that gave way to warm afternoons, perfect for the outdoor work that still needed completing before winter arrived. Olivia had finished the last of the curtains, and had turned her attention to preparing the house for the coming cold months. Today she was in the root cellar, organizing the preserves she'd put up from the garden Xavier had helped her plant shortly after her arrival. "Olivia," Xavier's voice called from the top of the stairs. "Are you down there?" "Yes, just finishing up," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. He appeared at the bottom of the steps, holding a letter. "Mail came. This is for you." Olivia took the envelope with surprise. She rarely received correspondence, having left most connections behind when she departed Pennsylvania. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the postmark from Denver. "Thank you," she said, tucking it into her pocket. "I'll read it later." Xavier nodded, though his expression held a hint of curiosity. "I'm heading out to check the north pasture fence. Thought I'd be back by supper if that works for you. Of course, I'll have something ready by 6. After he left, Olivia continued her work, but her thoughts kept returning to the letter. Who would be writing to her from Denver? Finally, unable to concentrate, she sat on a barrel and broke the seal. The letter was from a law firm, Thornton and Sons. As she read, her hand flew to her mouth in shock. Her father's colleague, Professor James Harper Williams' father, had died unexpectedly. In his will, he had acknowledged Emma as his granddaughter and left a modest sum for her care and education. He knew, Olivia whispered to the empty cellar. All this time, he knew. Tears blurred her vision as she continued reading. The lawyers required confirmation of Emma's identity and Olivia's whereabouts to release the funds. They requested she travel to Denver at her earliest convenience to sign the necessary paperwork. The opportunity was both a blessing and a complication. The money would provide security for Emma's future, something Olivia had worried about constantly since her birth. But traveling to Denver would mean leaving the ranch, leaving the work she'd begun, leaving Xavier. The thought brought an unexpected pang. When had his presence become so important to her? When had his opinion, his respect, started to matter so deeply? Wiping her eyes, Olivia folded the letter carefully and returned it to her pocket. She would need to think carefully about what to do next. That evening, as they shared a meal of rabbit stew and fresh bread, Olivia found herself studying Xavier when he wasn't looking. The lamplight caught the angles of his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes when he smiled. There was a steadiness to him that drew her, a reliability that had become a cornerstone of her new life. "You've been quiet tonight," he observed, breaking into her thoughts. "Is everything all right?" Olivia hesitated, then reached for the letter. "I received some unexpected news today." She passed him the letter, watching as he read it, his expression changing from curiosity to surprise. "This is wonderful news for Emma," he said finally, returning the letter. "The money will secure her future." "Yes," Olivia agreed, trying to gauge his reaction. "But it means I would need to travel to Denver." Xavier nodded slowly. "When would you go?" "I'm not certain. It would depend on when stage tickets are available and arrangements for lodging in the city." She paused, then added softly, "It would mean leaving here for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer." "I see." Xavier was quiet for a moment, his finger tracing the rim of his coffee cup. Would you be returning afterward?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken implications. Olivia found herself holding her breath as she met his gaze. "Would you want me to return?" she asked, her heart hammering in her chest. "Yes," Xavier said without hesitation, his voice low and certain. "This place. It's become different with you here. Better." Olivia felt warmth spreading through her chest. "I felt the same way. Then you'll come back." The hope in his voice was unmistakable. "Yes," she promised. "Emma and I will return." Relief washed over his features. "Good, that's good." He cleared his throat. "I could accompany you to Denver if you'd like. The cattle won't arrive until November and the most critical repairs are complete." The offer took Olivia by surprise. "You would do that, of course," he replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A woman traveling alone with a small child faces unnecessary difficulties. "And I have some business in Denver myself, supplies I need to order for winter." Olivia considered the proposal. Having Xavier along would indeed make the journey easier, safer. But it would also fuel the gossip in Tropic to new heights, traveling together, staying in the same hotels. As if reading her thoughts, Xavier added, "We could travel as brother and sister if that would ease your concerns about appearances." The suggestion was practical, considerate. Typical of the man she had come to know over these past weeks. "Thank you," she said finally. "I would appreciate the company." Xavier smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Then it's settled. I'll ride into town tomorrow to inquire about stage tickets." As they finished their meal and cleared away the dishes, Olivia felt a curious mix of emotions: anxiety about the journey ahead, relief at the prospect of securing Emma's future, and a warm, indefinable feeling whenever she thought of Xavier's insistence on accompanying them. That night, as she nursed Emma in the quiet darkness of their cabin, Olivia allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been trying to ignore for weeks. She was falling in love with Xavier Lockwood, a man who had offered her respect when others offered only judgment, who had seen value in her when others saw only shame. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. "What do I do with these feelings?" she whispered to her drowsy daughter. "How can I trust them after being so wrong before?" Emma's only response was to drift into sleep, her tiny hand still clutching her mother's finger. Olivia smiled down at her, marveling at how this small being had changed her life so completely, had led her here to this place, this moment, this crossroads. Whatever happened in Denver, whatever the future held, Olivia knew one thing with certainty: she and Emma were no longer alone. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was the beginning of everything. The journey to Denver was arranged for the following week. Xavier secured tickets on the stagecoach that would take them first to Cedar City, where they would connect with the larger line heading east. He also sent telegrams to both the law firm and a respectable hotel in Denver, making arrangements for their stay. As the departure date approached, Olivia found herself increasingly nervous, not about the trip itself, but about what it might mean for her relationship with Xavier. Away from the ranch, away from their established routine, would things change between them? The evening before they were to leave, Olivia finished packing the small valise that would hold her and Emma's necessities for the journey. Xavier had promised to have the rest of their luggage sent ahead by freight wagon, ensuring it would be waiting for them upon arrival in Denver. A knock at the cabin door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Xavier standing there, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "May I come in for a moment?" he asked. "Of course." Olivia stepped back, gesturing toward the chair by the stove. "Emma's just fallen asleep." Xavier nodded, glancing toward the cradle where the baby lay peacefully. He remained standing, turning his hat in his hands. "I wanted to give you something before we leave tomorrow, something that might make our travels easier." From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. Olivia's heart jumped to her throat as he opened it, revealing a simple gold band. "It's not what you might think," Xavier said quickly, seeing her expression. "It's my mother's wedding ring. I thought, if we're to travel together, it might be simpler to present ourselves as husband and wife rather than siblings. Less questions, less scrutiny." "Oh," Olivia said softly, relief and an inexplicable disappointment washing through her simultaneously. "Yes, that makes practical sense." "It would just be for appearances," Xavier added, his eyes serious as they met hers. "I wouldn't presume." "That is, I understand it's just an arrangement for convenience." Olivia reached for the ring, her fingers brushing against his palm as she took it. The metal was warm from being in his pocket, the design simple and elegant, a plain gold band with a small pattern of leaves etched into the surface. "It's beautiful," she said, slipping it onto her finger. "It fits surprisingly well." Thank you for thinking of this. Xavier cleared his throat, his eyes lingering on the ring now adorning her hand. It suits you, he said quietly, then seemed to catch himself. For our purposes, I mean. An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts and feelings. Olivia found herself wishing he would say more, reveal whatever was causing the intensity in his gaze. But Xavier only nodded, stepping back toward the door. We should leave by 7 tomorrow, he said, his tone returning to the practical. I'll have the wagon ready. I'll be prepared, Olivia assured him. With another nod, Xavier departed, leaving Olivia standing in the middle of her cabin, staring down at the ring that now encircled her finger. It was just for show, she reminded herself. Just a practical solution to avoid unwanted attention during their travels. Yet, as she continued her preparations, her gaze kept returning to the gold band, and she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like if it were real, if she were truly Xavier's wife, not just pretending for convenience's sake. Morning came quickly, the eastern sky barely tinged with pink as Olivia dressed and fed Emma. She chose her best traveling dress, a sage green wool that she had carefully maintained over the years. The style was somewhat outdated, but the quality of the fabric and stitching spoke of a time when her circumstances had been different. As promised, Xavier arrived with the wagon at 7 sharp. He helped load their valise and Emma's basket, then assisted Olivia up onto the seat. The morning air was crisp with early autumn, promising a pleasant day for travel. All set? Xavier asked, climbing up beside her. Olivia nodded, adjusting her bonnet. Yes, though I admit I'm a bit nervous about the journey. We'll take it one stage at a time, he assured her with a small smile at his own pun. Denver's a fine city, you'll like it there. As the wagon pulled away from the ranch, Olivia found herself looking back at the buildings that had become her home over the past month. The main house stood solid and welcoming, the repairs Xavier had completed giving it a renewed dignity. Her little cabin sat nearby, smoke still curling from the chimney where she damped the fire before leaving. It will all be waiting for us when we return, Xavier said, noticing her backward glance. Yes, Olivia agreed, turning to face forward again. I'm holding you to that promise. Their arrival in Tropic caused the expected stir, particularly when observant eyes noticed the gold band on Olivia's finger. Xavier handled the attention with easy confidence, referring to Olivia as my wife, so naturally that even she almost believed it. Mrs. Walsh happened to be posting a letter when they arrived at the stage depot. Her eyes widened at the sight of them together, then narrowed as she spotted the ring. Mr. Lockwood, Miss Olsen, she greeted them, her tone sharp with suspicion. What a surprise to see you in town so early. Mrs. Lockwood, actually, Xavier corrected smoothly. We were married last week by a traveling minister, quiet ceremony at the ranch. Olivia fought to keep her expression neutral, though her cheeks warmed at the bold lie. Mrs. Walsh's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to respond. How unexpected, I wasn't aware of any engagement. Some things don't require public announcement, Xavier replied with a polite smile. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to check our luggage before the stage arrives. As they walked away, Olivia whispered, That was wicked of you, poor Mrs. Walsh looked as if she might faint. Xavier's eyes danced with amusement. Consider it payback for all her unkindness toward you. Besides, the story will serve us well on our journey. But what happens when we return and people learn it wasn't true? His expression sobered. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. The stage arrived promptly at 8. And after securing their smaller luggage and saying a temporary farewell to the wagon and horse they'd leave in the livery's care, they boarded for the first leg of their journey to Cedar City. Traveling by stagecoach was never comfortable, but Xavier did his best to ensure Olivia and Emma had the least uncomfortable positions. He took the middle seat facing backward, which most passengers avoided due to motion sickness, allowing Olivia the corner seat with the window. Emma proved to be a surprisingly good traveler, sleeping through much of the jostling ride and charming their fellow passengers during her waking moments. The other travelers accepted without question that they were a married couple, several commenting on what a beautiful family they made. Each time, Olivia felt a mixture of pleasure and guilt at the deception, though she couldn't deny there was something appealing about the pretense. By the time they reached Cedar City and transferred to the larger eastbound stage, Olivia found herself settling into the role with increasing ease. When the hotel clerk in Cedar City addressed her as Mrs. Lockwood, she responded without hesitation. When Xavier placed a protective hand at the small of her back as they navigated crowded walkways, she leaned into his touch as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The second leg of their journey was longer and more arduous, the road climbing through mountain passes before descending toward the high plains that led to Denver. They spent 2 nights in roadside inns, where Xavier always secured 2 rooms, one for himself and one for Olivia and Emma. Despite their pretense of marriage, he maintained a respectful distance that both relieved and disappointed her. On the 5th day of travel, as the stage rattled along the final stretch toward Denver, Emma became particularly fussy, overtired from the constant motion and strange surroundings. Olivia tried everything to soothe her, growing increasingly embarrassed as the baby's cries grew louder. "May I?" Xavier asked quietly, holding out his arms. Hesitantly, Olivia passed Emma to him. To her amazement, Xavier tucked the baby securely against his chest and began humming a low, gentle tune. Within minutes, Emma's cries subsided to hiccuping sobs, and soon after she was fast asleep against his shoulder. "How did you do that?" Olivia whispered, impressed. "My youngest brother was colicky," Xavier explained with a small smile. "Learned a few tricks out of necessity." The elderly woman seated across from them beamed approvingly. "You have a natural way with children, Mr. Lockwood, the mark of a good father." "Thank you, madam," Xavier replied, his eyes meeting Olivia's over Emma's sleeping form. Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a shared understanding, a glimpse of what could be. Olivia looked away first, her heart racing. It was too easy to imagine this wasn't pretend, that they were truly a family traveling together. Too easy to want that fiction to become reality. Denver appeared on the horizon late that afternoon. The growing city sprawled across the plains with the majestic Rocky Mountains as its backdrop. Olivia had never seen a city so large, having spent most of her life in small towns and rural areas. The sight was both intimidating and exhilarating. "Impressive, isn't it?" Xavier remarked, noticing her wide-eyed gaze. "It's enormous," Olivia replied. "How will we ever find our way around?" "Thomas, my brother, provided excellent directions to the hotel," Xavier assured her. "And it's not as overwhelming as it appears at first glance." The stage delivered them to the central depot as the sun was beginning to set. Xavier efficiently arranged for a carriage to take them to the Brown Palace Hotel, a relatively new establishment that was quickly gaining a reputation as one of Denver's finest accommodations. Olivia felt distinctly out of place as they entered the grand lobby with its ornate fixtures and well-dressed patrons. Her travel-worn dress and dusty boots seemed woefully inadequate amidst such splendor. But Xavier moved with confidence, Emma still sleeping against his shoulder as he approached the front desk. "Reservation for Lockwood," he informed the clerk. "My wife and daughter will be joining me." The clerk checked his ledger, then nodded. "Yes, Mr. Lockwood." We have your suite ready as requested. 2 bedrooms with a shared sitting room." Olivia blinked in surprise. A suite? Such accommodations would be expensive, far more than she had anticipated. She gave Xavier a questioning look, which he answered with a slight shake of his head, "Not now." Once they were settled in the luxurious rooms, far more elegant than any Olivia had ever stayed in, Xavier finally explained. "I wanted you and Emma to be comfortable," he said as they sat in the sitting room after Emma had been put to bed in one of the bedrooms. "And I thought having separate sleeping chambers while maintaining the appearance of being a family would be the most appropriate arrangement." "It's very considerate," Olivia acknowledged. "But Xavier, this must be terribly expensive." He shrugged, seeming uncomfortable with the observation. "I've been saving for many years. The ranch wasn't my only investment." Olivia studied him curiously. There were clearly aspects of Xavier's life and background she still didn't know, layers to the man she had yet to discover. "Well, thank you," she said finally. "It's more than I could have hoped for." Xavier nodded, his expression softening. "You deserve to be treated well, Olivia. Both of you do." The simple statement touched her deeply, and she found herself blinking back tears. How long had it been since anyone had believed she deserved anything good? "I've arranged to meet with the lawyers tomorrow morning," Xavier continued, apparently not noticing her emotional response. "Would you prefer I accompany you, or would you rather handle it alone?" Olivia considered the question. Part of her wanted to assert her independence, to show she could manage such matters without assistance. But another part recognized the practical advantages of having Xavier with her. His presence would lend credibility and support. "I would appreciate your company," she decided. "If it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all," he assured her. "The appointment is at 10. Afterward, I thought perhaps we might visit my brother's store. He's eager to meet you." "You've told your brother about me." Olivia couldn't hide her surprise. Xavier's cheeks colored slightly. "I mentioned in my letter that I had hired help at the ranch, a woman with a young daughter." "I see," Olivia said, though she sensed there was more to it than that. "I would be pleased to meet him." They talked for a while longer about their plans for the next few days, the practicalities of their visit providing safe conversational ground. But as the evening wore on, Olivia found herself increasingly aware of Xavier, the way the lamplight caught the angles of his face, the gentle strength in his hands as he gestured, the warmth in his eyes when they rested on her. When they finally bid each other good night and retired to their separate rooms, Olivia lay awake for a long time, her thoughts a confusing tangle of hope, fear, and longing. The gold band on her finger caught the moonlight streaming through the window, a constant reminder of what was pretend and what was real. Or was the line between those things beginning to blur? The morning brought clear skies and a sense of anticipation. Olivia dressed carefully in her best day dress, the same one she had worn on their departure, freshly pressed by the hotel staff overnight. She arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style, wanting to present a respectable appearance for the meeting with the lawyers. Xavier was waiting in the sitting room when she emerged from her bedroom, Emma freshly fed and dressed in her arms. He stood as she entered, his expression appreciative as he took in her appearance. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you," Olivia replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "I want to make a good impression." "You will," he assured her, offering his arm. "Shall we go down to breakfast before our appointment?" The hotel's dining room was as impressive as the lobby, with crisp white tablecloths, polished silver, and attentive servers. Several patrons glanced their way as they were seated, but the looks were curious rather than judgmental. Here in Denver, they were just another young family, their past and circumstances unknown and unremarkable. Olivia found she enjoyed the anonymity, the freedom from the weight of gossip and disapproval that had followed her in Tropic. As they shared a leisurely breakfast, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to live this way, permanently respected, accepted, part of a normal family unit. The law offices of Thornton and Sons were located in a handsome brick building near the city center. The senior partner, Mr. Thornton himself, received them in his wood-paneled office with courteous efficiency. "Mrs. Lockwood," he greeted Olivia, accepting Xavier's introduction without question. "And this must be young Emma Harper." "Yes," Olivia confirmed, adjusting the baby in her arms so Mr. Thornton could see her more clearly. "Though she bears my husband's name now." The lie came easily, perhaps too easily. Xavier's hand came to rest at the small of her back, a silent support that she appreciated more than he could know. Mr. Thornton nodded, gesturing for them to be seated before his large desk. "I was acquainted with Professor Harper for many years. A brilliant man, though perhaps somewhat rigid in his views. It speaks well of him that he acknowledged his granddaughter in his will, despite the circumstances." Olivia tensed slightly at the reference, but Mr. Thornton's tone held no judgment, merely stating facts. "The bequest is straightforward," the lawyer continued, opening a file before him. "A sum of $2,000 to be held in trust for Emma's education and welfare until she reaches the age of 18. You, as her mother, will have access to the interest earned, plus an allowance of $50 quarterly for immediate needs." Olivia's breath caught. It was far more than she had expected, a sum that would ensure Emma would never want for essentials, that she could have the education Olivia herself had received, perhaps even attend university someday. "Additionally," Mr. Thornton added, "Professor Harper left this for you personally." He withdrew an envelope from the file and handed it across the desk. With slightly trembling fingers, Olivia accepted it. Her name was written on the front in a familiar scholarly hand. Professor Harper had often corrected her father's students' papers at their home, and she recognized his precise script. "You may read it at your leisure," Mr. Thornton said kindly. "Now, if you could sign these documents, we can proceed with establishing the trust." The remainder of the meeting passed in a blur of signatures and explanations of legal terms. Xavier asked several astute questions about the management of the trust and the safeguards in place to protect Emma's inheritance, impressing both Olivia and the lawyer with his knowledge of financial matters. When they left the office an hour later, Olivia felt as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Emma's future was secure, regardless of what might happen. It was a freedom she had never expected to know. "Are you all right?" Xavier asked as they stood on the sidewalk outside the building. "You're very quiet." Olivia nodded, blinking back tears. "Just overwhelmed. It's more than I dared hope for." Xavier's expression softened. "You haven't read his letter." "I'm not sure I'm ready," she admitted. "What if it's filled with recrimination? What if he only did this out of duty, not forgiveness? Either way, he's ensured Emma's welfare," Xavier pointed out gently. "That speaks to his character, regardless of his personal feelings." Olivia nodded, tucking the envelope carefully into her reticule. "You're right. I'll read it later when I'm prepared for whatever it contains." Xavier offered his arm once more. "Shall we visit Thomas's store now? It's not far from here, and I promised we'd stop by before noon." Grateful for the change of subject, Olivia nodded. "I'd like that." Thomas Lockwood's establishment, Lockwood's Mercantile, occupied a prime corner location on one of Denver's busier streets. The large display windows showcased an impressive variety of goods, from practical homesteading supplies to more luxurious items. A bell jingled as they entered, and a tall man who bore a striking resemblance to Xavier looked up from behind the counter. His face broke into a wide grin at the sight of them. "Xav," he called, coming around to greet them with a hearty handshake and back slap. "Right on time, as always." "Thomas," Xavier returned the greeting warmly. "Allow me to introduce Olivia and Emma." Thomas's eyes moved to Olivia, curiosity and something like recognition in his gaze. "Miss Olsen, it's a pleasure to meet you at last. My brother's letters have mentioned you quite extensively." Olivia glanced at Xavier, who suddenly seemed very interested in examining a display of pocket watches. "All good things, I hope." "Exceedingly good," Thomas assured her with a smile that matched his brother's in warmth if not in restraint. "And this must be little Emma." The baby, who had been quiet during their visit to the lawyer's office, now cooed and reached toward Thomas with a tiny hand. He laughed, offering his finger for her to grasp. "She has good taste in men, I see," he joked. "Takes after her mother in that regard." Xavier cleared his throat loudly. "Thomas, don't you have that order for me to review?" Of course," Thomas agreed, though his eyes twinkled with mischief. "It's in my office. But first, let me close up for lunch. I've arranged for us to dine at Delmonico's around the corner best restaurant in Denver." As Thomas busied himself with locking the front door and turning the sign to closed, Olivia moved closer to Xavier. "What exactly have you written about me?" she asked quietly. Xavier's cheeks colored slightly. "Nothing inappropriate, I assure you, just perhaps more detailed descriptions than strictly necessary for business correspondence." Before Olivia could pursue the matter further, Thomas rejoined them, ushering them toward the back of the store. "Let's go through the alley. It's a shorter walk to the restaurant." Lunch proved to be a delightful affair. Thomas was an engaging conversationalist, full of stories about growing up with Xavier and their younger brother Samuel. Olivia found herself laughing more than she had in months, perhaps years, particularly at tales of Xavier's youthful misadventures. "He was always the serious one," Thomas explained, ignoring his brother's warning looks. "Even at 10 years old, shouldering responsibilities like a grown man, but occasionally his sense of adventure would get the better of him." "I'm finding that hard to believe," Olivia teased, glancing at Xavier's now distinctly uncomfortable expression. "Oh, it's true," Thomas insisted. "Like the time he decided to break the new stallion our father had purchased without permission, mind you, and ended up in the top branches of the old oak tree beside the barn. The horse objected to my methods," Xavier admitted with a reluctant smile. "Made his feelings quite clear by depositing me on the nearest available perch." Olivia laughed, trying to imagine the dignified man beside her as a headstrong boy. "How long were you stuck in the tree?" 3 hours, Thomas supplied gleefully. "Until father came home and talked him down like a scared cat." The meal continued in this vein, with Thomas seemingly determined to reveal every embarrassing detail of Xavier's youth. Rather than being diminished by these stories, however, Xavier seemed to grow more human, more approachable in Olivia's eyes. She began to understand the events that had shaped him, the family dynamics that had created the man she knew. As they were finishing dessert, Thomas's expression grew more serious. "Xav mentioned you're staying at the Brown Palace. How long will you be in Denver?" "Another 3 days," Xavier replied. "We'll start back on Monday." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Then you must all come to dinner at my home tomorrow evening. Catherine, my wife, would be delighted to meet you, Olivia, and she's been asking about Xav for months." "That sounds lovely," Olivia began, but Xavier interrupted. "Thomas, I'm not sure if—" "Nonsense," his brother cut him off firmly. "Catherine will be devastated if you don't visit. Besides, she's already planning the menu." Xavier glanced at Olivia, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, indicating her willingness. Very well, Xavier conceded. What time should we arrive? 6 o'clock, Thomas replied, looking pleased. And Olivia, please don't feel you need to bring anything. Just yourselves. As they said their goodbyes outside the restaurant, Thomas pulled Xavier aside for a moment while Olivia adjusted Emma's blanket against the slight chill in the air. She couldn't hear their conversation, but Xavier's expression shifted from surprise to contemplation to something like hope. When he rejoined her, offering his arm once more, Olivia raised an eyebrow in question. Brotherly advice, Xavier explained with a small smile. Thomas has always considered himself wiser in certain matters. And is he? Olivia asked curiously. Xavier's eyes met hers, something warm and unreadable in their depths. Sometimes, he admitted, though I'd never tell him so. They spent the remainder of the afternoon exploring Denver's shops, Xavier insisting on purchasing several items for Emma: a silver rattle, a soft woolen blanket, and a miniature porcelain doll for when she was older. When Olivia protested the expense, he simply shook his head. Consider it belated celebration of her arrival, he said. I would have brought gifts if I'd known you when she was born. The simple statement touched Olivia deeply. Most men would have kept their distance from a woman in her situation, certainly wouldn't have embraced her child as Xavier had done. Yet here he was, shopping for baby gifts as if Emma were his own daughter, carrying her when Olivia grew tired, making faces to entertain her when she fussed. As twilight fell and they returned to the hotel, Olivia found herself more confused than ever about her feelings. The pretense of being Xavier's wife had begun to feel natural, comfortable. The thought of returning to Tropic and resuming their previous arrangement, employer and employee, living in separate dwellings, seemed increasingly hollow. But what alternatives existed? She couldn't imagine Xavier would want to continue the charade once they returned. And even if he harbored feelings beyond friendship and respect, would he truly want to take on another man's child, to bind himself to a woman whose reputation was already compromised? These questions weighed on her mind as she prepared for dinner, which they would take in the hotel's dining room. When she emerged from her bedroom, wearing the same dress but with her hair arranged differently, she found Xavier standing by the window, staring out at the city lights. He turned at the sound of her door, his expression clearing as he took in her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Olivia replied, her pulse quickening at the sincerity in his voice. "Is Emma asleep?" Xavier nodded. "Just drifted off. I checked on her a moment ago." "You're very good with her," Olivia observed, moving to stand beside him at the window. "It's as if you've had years of practice, not just weeks." "She makes it easy," he said with a slight smile. "She has her mother's sweet nature." The compliment warmed Olivia, though she shook her head. "I'm not always sweet-natured. Ask anyone in Tropic." "They don't know you," Xavier replied firmly. "They see what they expect to see, not who you really are." Olivia turned to face him fully. "And who am I, Xavier Lockwood? Who do you see when you look at me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning beyond the simple words. Xavier's gaze held hers, unwavering. "I see a woman of remarkable courage," he said quietly. "Someone who faces each day with grace despite the burden she carries. I see intelligence and kindness and a fierce love for her child. I see someone who deserves far better than the hand she's been dealt." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever described her with such perception, such admiration. "Xavier," a knock at the door interrupted whatever she might have said. Xavier's jaw tightened in momentary frustration before he moved to answer it. A hotel staff member stood there with a message, a dinner invitation from a business associate who had heard Xavier was in town. "Please convey my regrets," Xavier told the messenger after reading the note. I already have plans with my wife this evening." After closing the door, he turned back to Olivia with an apologetic smile. "I hope you don't mind the continued pretense. It simplifies explanations." "Of course not," Olivia replied, though she felt a pang of disappointment that the moment between them had been broken. "Shall we go down to dinner?" The dining room was busy, filled with Denver's well-to-do enjoying fine food and conversation. As they were shown to their table, Olivia noticed several curious glances in their direction. Unlike in Tropic, however, the looks seemed appreciative rather than judgmental, a handsome couple making an attractive picture. Over soup and roasted duck, they discussed their plans for the remainder of their stay. Xavier had business to conduct the following morning but would be free by afternoon. They would visit Thomas and his wife for dinner, then spend Sunday sightseeing before beginning their journey home on Monday. "Have you read Professor Harper's letter yet?" Xavier asked as they were finishing dessert. Olivia shook her head. "Not yet. I'm still gathering my courage. Would you like me to leave you alone this evening to do so?" The offer was considerate, but Olivia found herself reluctant to face whatever the letter contained without Xavier's steadying presence nearby. "Actually, I was thinking I might read it now if you wouldn't mind." Xavier nodded encouragingly. "Of course." With slightly trembling fingers, Olivia retrieved the envelope from her reticule. Breaking the seal, she unfolded the single sheet of paper covered in Professor Harper's precise handwriting. Taking a deep breath, she began to read silently. "Dear Miss Olsen, if you are reading this, I have passed from this world without having the opportunity to speak with you in person, a failing for which I must express my deepest regret. I have known of your situation and my son's involvement for some time, though I confess I did not act as promptly or honorably as I should have when the information first reached me. William confided in me shortly after your departure from Pennsylvania. He was frightened, immature, and seeking an escape from responsibility. To my eternal shame, I provided that escape by sending him to my brother's home in Boston, where he has remained. I told myself I was protecting his future, his reputation, but in truth, I was merely protecting my own comfort and standing in the community. It was only when I received word of your father's passing that I began to truly reflect on the gravity of my actions and the burden I had helped place upon your shoulders. I made inquiries, discovering you had traveled west, but by then, my health was failing and I lacked the strength to make the journey to find you. Please know that I have taken steps to ensure your child, my grandchild, will not want for educational opportunities when the time comes. It is a small atonement for the greater failing of both myself and my son. If there is forgiveness to be found for an old man's weakness, I humbly request it. If not, I understand and accept your judgment. With deepest regrets and sincerest wishes for your welfare, James Harper. Tears blurred Olivia's vision as she finished reading. The letter wasn't what she had expected, not condemnation or reluctant duty, but genuine regret and an attempt, however belated, to make amends. "Olivia." Xavier's voice was gentle with concern. "Are you all right?" She passed him the letter wordlessly, using the moment to compose herself. Xavier read it quickly, his expression grave. "He knew," Olivia said softly when Xavier looked up. "All this time he knew where William was, what he had done." "Yes," Xavier agreed, returning the letter, "but he also recognized his own failings in the end. That counts for something." "It does," Olivia acknowledged, carefully refolding the paper. "And he's provided for Emma, which is more than I ever expected. You want to find William?" Xavier asked quietly. Now that you know he's in Boston, the question took Olivia by surprise. She hadn't considered the possibility, but now that Xavier mentioned it, she realized the letter did provide that opportunity if she wished to pursue it. After a moment's reflection, she shook her head. No, William made his choice. He's not the man I thought he was, not someone I want in Emma's life, or mine. Relief flickered across Xavier's features, so briefly Olivia might have imagined it. That seems wise, he said simply. They finished their meal in thoughtful silence, each processing the implications of Professor Harper's confession. As they walked back to their suite afterward, Xavier offered his arm, and Olivia took it gratefully, drawing strength from his solid presence. In the sitting room they paused, the moment somehow weighted with significance. Emma still slept peacefully in the adjoining bedroom, the hotel around them quiet save for the occasional distant sound of other guests. "Thank you," Olivia said suddenly. Xavier tilted his head questioningly. "For what? For being here. For coming with me. For—" She gestured vaguely, struggling to articulate all he had done for her and Emma. "For everything." His expression softened. "You don't need to thank me, Olivia. I wanted to come. I want to help you, to be there for you and Emma." The sincerity in his voice emboldened her. "Why?" she asked, taking a step closer to him. "Why do you care what happens to us?" Xavier's eyes held hers, something like resolve settling in their depths. "Because you've come to mean a great deal to me, both of you." Olivia's heart thundered in her chest. "And what does that mean exactly?" "It means," Xavier said slowly, deliberately, "that I can no longer pretend this is just an arrangement of convenience, that wearing my mother's ring on your finger affects me more than it should, that the thought of returning to Tropic and going back to our separate lives seems wrong." Hope bloomed in Olivia's chest, fragile but persistent. "What are you saying, Xavier?" He took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "I'm saying that somewhere between your arrival at the ranch and this moment, I've fallen in love with you, Olivia Olsen. With your strength, your grace, your devotion to Emma, with everything that makes you who you are." Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. "I've been afraid to admit my own feelings," she confessed. "Afraid to trust them after being so wrong before. Afraid you couldn't possibly want someone with my past, my complications." "Your past is what shaped you into the woman you are," Xavier said firmly. "And Emma is a blessing, not a complication." He paused, his expression growing serious. "But I need you to be certain, Olivia. I don't want you to accept me out of gratitude or practicality. If your heart isn't engaged," Olivia silenced him by placing her fingers gently against his lips. "My heart is very much engaged, Xavier Lockwood. I love you. I think perhaps I began falling the day you stood up to Mrs. Walsh and said you'd prove them wrong with me." Xavier's smile was radiant as he caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Then perhaps we should make this pretense real," he suggested, his voice husky with emotion. "When we return to Tropic—" "Are you asking me to marry you?" Olivia whispered, hardly daring to believe what was happening. "I am," Xavier confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm asking you to be my wife and to let me be a father to Emma, to build a life together at the ranch, a real home, a real family." "Yes," Olivia said without hesitation, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. "Yes, I will marry you." Xavier's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a gentle, reverent kiss. Olivia responded with all the love and hope that had been building in her heart, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you won't regret this," he murmured. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving those people wrong about you." "We'll prove them wrong together," Olivia corrected softly. "All three of us." In that moment, with Xavier's arms around her and Emma sleeping peacefully in the next room, Olivia felt a certainty she had never known before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, They would face them as a family. And for the first time since learning she was carrying Emma, Olivia felt not shame or fear about her future, but pride and hope. The town might have said she wasn't fit to be a mother, but Xavier Lockwood had seen the truth. And together, they would make sure Emma grew up knowing nothing but love, respect, and belonging. The dinner with Thomas and his wife Catherine the following evening proved to be a celebration rather than a mere social visit. When Xavier announced their engagement, Thomas let out a whoop of delight that startled Emma into a brief crying jag, while Catherine, a pretty, practical woman with a ready smile, embraced Olivia as if they were already sisters. "I knew it," Thomas crowed, clapping Xavier on the back. "Didn't I tell you, Catherine? The way he wrote about her in his letters, he was smitten from the start." Xavier rolled his eyes, though his expression remained pleased. "Your powers of observation continue to amaze us all, brother." Catherine bustled about, bringing champagne to toast the engagement and cooing over Emma, who had recovered from her fright and was now basking in the attention of her new aunt. "When will the wedding be?" she asked, passing Olivia a glass. "We haven't discussed details yet," Olivia admitted, glancing at Xavier. "But soon, I think, before winter sets in." Xavier nodded in agreement. "No sense in waiting. We'll speak with the minister in Tropic as soon as we return." "And what about the town gossips?" Thomas asked, his expression growing more serious. "Last you wrote, they weren't exactly welcoming to Olivia." A shadow crossed Xavier's face. "They'll have to adjust their thinking. Olivia will be my wife, Emma my daughter, in every way that matters. Anyone who can't accept that will find themselves unwelcome at the Lockwood Ranch. And business," Thomas added with a nod. "I've been considering opening a second store. Tropic might be just the place if the residents prove hospitable to my new sister-in-law. Otherwise, perhaps Cedar City would be more suitable." Olivia's eyes widened at this unexpected show of support. "You would consider our situation in your business decisions." "Family comes first," Thomas said firmly. "Always has in the Lockwood clan." Catherine nodded in agreement. "And you are family now, Olivia. You and Emma both." Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes, unexpected emotion welling up at their immediate acceptance. Xavier's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently in understanding. The evening continued in a glow of celebration and connection, with Thomas regaling them with more stories from their childhood and Catherine sharing details of her own journey west from Boston 5 years earlier. By the time they departed, promises had been made for future visits in both directions, and plans discussed for Thomas and Catherine to attend the wedding. "Your family is wonderful," Olivia told Xavier as they returned to the hotel, Emma sleeping soundly in his arms. "They accepted me without question. They recognized what I already knew," Xavier replied simply, "that you belong with us." The following day, their last in Denver, Xavier surprised Olivia by taking her to several shops, insisting she select new dresses, boots, and a proper winter coat. When she protested the expense, he simply smiled. "Consider it an engagement present," he said. "Besides, the ranch will be receiving visitors once word of our wedding spreads. You should have clothes that reflect your new position as a rancher's wife." Olivia asked, fingering a beautiful blue silk she would never have dared consider before. "As my wife," Xavier corrected. "Who deserves beautiful things simply because they please her?" With his encouragement, Olivia selected several ready-made dresses and commissioned 2 more, including a sage green silk for their wedding. For Emma, they purchased a layette of new clothing, and Xavier insisted on a tiny silver hairbrush and comb set that made Olivia laugh. "She hardly has any hair yet," she protested as he added it to their purchases. "She will," Xavier replied confidently, And when she does, she'll have proper implements to care for it. Their final evening in Denver was spent quietly in their suite, making plans for their return to Tropic, and the wedding that would follow. Xavier had sent a telegram to the ranch foreman he'd hired in their absence, instructing him to have the main house fully prepared for Olivia and Emma's arrival. "You won't need the cabin anymore," he explained, "though we can keep it for guests." "It seems like a dream," Olivia admitted as they sat before the fireplace, Emma sleeping in her basket nearby. "A month ago, I was barely surviving in Tropic, uncertain how I would make the next rent payment. Now you're engaged to the most eligible bachelor in the county," Xavier teased, his eyes warm as they rested on her. "Poor Mrs. Walsh may never recover." Olivia laughed softly. "She'll be convinced I trapped you somehow." "Let her think what she likes," Xavier said dismissively. "Her opinion matters even less now than it did before." As they prepared to return to their separate bedrooms for the last night they would spend thus, before their wedding, Xavier drew Olivia close for a lingering kiss. "When we return tomorrow," he murmured against her hair, "everything changes. No more pretending, no more separate dwellings. We'll face whatever comes together." "Together," Olivia agreed, her heart full of a joy she had never expected to find. The journey back to Tropic seemed shorter somehow, despite following the same route they had taken to Denver. Perhaps it was because this time they traveled not as employer and employee, not even as pretend husband and wife, but as a couple truly committed to building a future together. Word had somehow preceded them to Cedar City, likely via telegram from Thomas, and several people congratulated them on their engagement during their overnight stay. By the time they boarded the stage for the final leg to Tropic, Olivia had grown accustomed to introducing herself as the future Mrs. Lockwood, each repetition making it feel more real, more certain. It was mid-afternoon when the stage rolled into Tropic. The town looked much as they had left it, dusty, small, the buildings weathered by sun and wind. But Olivia's perspective had shifted dramatically. This was no longer a place of judgment and isolation, but simply the nearest town to the home she would share with Xavier and Emma. As they stepped down from the stage, Emma secure in Olivia's arms, the inevitable curious onlookers gathered. Among them was Mrs. Walsh, her expression pinched with disapproval as she took in their travel-worn appearance and the easy familiarity between them. "Mr. Lockwood," she greeted them stiffly. "Miss Olsen, I trust your journey was successful." "Exceedingly so," Xavier replied, his hand coming to rest protectively at the small of Olivia's back. "In fact, we have news to share with the community." Mrs. Walsh's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed?" "Yes," Xavier continued, raising his voice slightly to ensure the gathering crowd could hear. "Miss Olsen has done me the great honor of accepting my proposal of marriage. We will be wed as soon as arrangements can be made." A murmur ran through the onlookers, expressions ranging from shock to curiosity to, in a few cases, genuine pleasure. "How surprising," Mrs. Walsh managed, her smile as brittle as thin ice. "Rather sudden, isn't it?" "On the contrary," Xavier replied smoothly. "I've known since, shortly after meeting Olivia, that she possesses all the qualities I most value: strength, intelligence, compassion, and devotion to family. I'm fortunate she returns my regard." Olivia's heart swelled at his public declaration. She shifted Emma to one arm so she could slip her other hand into Xavier's, drawing strength from his unwavering support. "Well," Mrs. Walsh said after a moment, clearly struggling to maintain her composure, "I suppose congratulations are in order." "Thank you," Olivia replied, meeting the woman's gaze directly for perhaps the first time since arriving in Tropic. "We're very happy." Other townspeople began to approach. some offering genuine congratulations, others clearly just curious about this unexpected development. Xavier handled each interaction with practiced ease, never leaving Olivia's side, his pride in their engagement evident in every word and gesture. By the time they collected their luggage and arranged for transportation to the ranch, Olivia felt a curious sense of closure. The town that had once seemed so threatening, so judgmental, now held no power over her. She was leaving as she had arrived with her daughter in her arms, and her head held high, but this time, she was not alone. The ranch welcomed them with golden afternoon light bathing the buildings, making them seem to glow against the backdrop of red cliffs. The foreman, Mr. Jensen, greeted them at the gate, tipping his hat respectfully to Olivia before updating Xavier on the work completed in their absence. "The main house is ready, as you requested, sir," he reported, "and the first cattle shipment is confirmed for the 15th of next month." "Excellent work, Jensen," Xavier commended him. "Allow me to introduce my fiancée, Miss Olsen, and her daughter Emma, soon to be Lockwoods, both of them." Jensen's weathered face creased in a genuine smile. "Pleasure to meet you properly, madam. Congratulations on your engagement." "Thank you, Mr. Jensen," Olivia replied, warmed by his straightforward acceptance. "I look forward to getting to know you better." As Xavier drove the wagon toward the main house, Olivia found herself studying it with new eyes, not as a work project, but as her future home. The repairs Xavier had completed before their departure had transformed it from neglected to welcoming, the fresh paint and mended shutters giving it a cared-for appearance. "Welcome home," Xavier said softly as he helped her down from the wagon, Emma drowsing against her shoulder after the long journey home. The word resonated in Olivia's heart as they climbed the porch steps together. Not a temporary shelter, not a place of refuge, but a true home, a place to belong, to build a life, to raise a family. Xavier opened the door, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms, Emma and all, to carry them across the threshold. "Xavier!" Olivia exclaimed, laughing despite her surprise. "This is supposed to wait until after the wedding. Consider it practice," he replied with a grin, setting her gently on her feet in the entryway. "Besides, I couldn't wait to bring you home properly." The interior of the house smelled of fresh paint and beeswax polish. Olivia's curtains hung at the windows, catching the late afternoon light, and a vase of wildflowers sat on the entry table, a thoughtful touch from Jensen's wife, perhaps. "Would you like to see upstairs?" Xavier asked. "I had some work done while we were away." Curious, Olivia followed him up the broad staircase, Emma still nestled against her. The upper floor contained 4 bedrooms and a small sitting area. Xavier led her to the largest room, which overlooked the valley. "This would be our room," he said, a question in his voice. "If you approve." Olivia stepped inside, taking in the spacious chamber with its large 4-poster bed, dresser, and comfortable chairs by the window. The curtains she had sewn hung here too, but someone had added matching bed covers and cushions that complemented the fabric perfectly. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "Perfect." Xavier's expression relaxed. "And through here," he continued, moving to a connecting door, "is what I hope will be Emma's nursery." He opened the door to reveal a smaller room, painted a soft yellow with white trim. A cradle far finer than the makeshift one Olivia had fashioned stood in one corner, and a rocking chair by the window. A small bookshelf held several children's books, and a handmade quilt in pastel colors was draped over the rail of the cradle. "Oh, Xavier," Olivia breathed, tears springing to her eyes. "You did all this while we were gone." "I sent instructions with the supply wagon," he explained, watching her reaction carefully. "Mrs. Jensen helped with the details. Do you like it?" "Like it?" Olivia turned to face him, her heart so full she could barely speak. "It's the most thoughtful, beautiful gift anyone has ever given us." Emma stirred in her arms, blinking sleepily at her new surroundings. As if sensing the significance of the moment, she let out a happy coo. Reaching one tiny hand toward the mobile hanging above the cradle, delicate wooden figures of horses and stars that turned gently in the breeze from the open window. "I think she approves," Xavier said with a soft smile, moving to stand beside them. "May I?" Olivia passed Emma to him, watching as he cradled her daughter with practiced ease, speaking to her in low, gentle tones as he showed her around her new room. The sight made her throat tighten with emotion, this strong, capable man who had opened his heart and home to them both, who saw Emma not as a burden or complication, but as a precious gift. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Xavier said as Emma began to drift back to sleep in his arms. He laid her gently in the cradle before turning back to Olivia. "Something important." "What is it?" Olivia asked, noting the sudden seriousness in his expression. Xavier took her hands in his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her skin. "When we marry, I want to adopt Emma legally, to give her my name, to make her my daughter in the eyes of the law as well as in my heart." Olivia's breath caught. It was more than she had dared to hope for, not just acceptance of Emma, but a true desire to claim her as his own. "Are you certain?" she asked, searching his face. "She's not your blood, Xavier. Some men might find that difficult to accept." "Blood doesn't make a family," Xavier replied firmly. "Love does. And I already love her, Olivia. How could I not? She's part of you." Tears spilled onto Olivia's cheeks as the full weight of his words sank in. This was what she had wanted for Emma from the beginning, a father who would cherish her, protect her, see her as the blessing Olivia knew her to be. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I would be honored for you to be Emma's father in every way." Xavier's smile was radiant as he drew Olivia into his arms, holding her close as if she were something infinitely precious. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair, "for trusting me with both your hearts." The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparations. Word of their engagement spread quickly throughout the area, and to Olivia's surprise, many of the townsfolk made efforts to demonstrate their acceptance, if not of her past, then at least of her future as Mrs. Lockwood. Mrs. Finch from the general store brought a basket of preserves as a wedding gift. Mr. Peterson, the blacksmith, offered to craft a special set of horseshoes for the wedding day for luck, he explained gruffly. Even some of the women who had previously avoided Olivia now greeted her politely when she visited town for wedding supplies. Mrs. Walsh remained coolly civil, neither congratulating them nor openly opposing the match. Her influence, however, seemed to have diminished somewhat, as if the community had recognized the unfairness of their earlier judgment and were making quiet amends. The minister, Reverend Collins, visited the ranch to discuss the ceremony with them. To Olivia's relief, he showed no hesitation about performing the service, treating her with the same respect he accorded Xavier. "Love and forgiveness are at the heart of our faith," he told them as they sat in the parlor discussing readings for the ceremony. "A community that forgets that becomes something less than Christian." The wedding was set for October 15, allowing just enough time for Olivia's dresses to arrive from Denver and for Thomas and Catherine to make the journey from Colorado. Xavier insisted on a proper celebration, inviting not only the ranch hands and townspeople, but also neighboring ranchers and their families. "I want everyone to witness your rightful place as my wife," he explained when Olivia expressed surprise at the growing guest list. "No whispers, no doubts, no questions about our commitment to each other." The day before the wedding, Thomas and Catherine arrived, bringing with them trunks of gifts and decorations. Catherine immediately took charge of the final preparations, freeing Olivia to focus on Emma and her own readiness for the ceremony. That evening, as tradition dictated, Xavier would spend the night in town, returning only for the wedding itself the next day. Before he left, he found Olivia in the nursery where she was settling Emma for the night. "This will be the last night I spend away from you," he said softly, coming to stand beside her at the cradle. "The last night you'll be Miss Olsen." Olivia smiled up at him, her heart full of quiet joy. "The last night I'll wonder what the future holds." Xavier reached out to touch Emma's downy head gently, then drew Olivia into his arms. "Are you happy, truly?" he asked, his expression serious as he studied her face. "No doubts, no reservations." "None," Olivia assured him, rising on tiptoe to press a soft kiss to his lips. "My only regret is that we didn't meet sooner." "Perhaps it had to happen just as it did," Xavier suggested, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Each of us traveling our separate paths until they could converge at exactly the right moment." "A romantic notion," Olivia teased gently, "from my practical rancher." Xavier's smile was tender as he leaned down to kiss her once more. "You bring out unexpected qualities in me, Olivia Olsen. I look forward to discovering more of them in the years ahead." Morning dawned clear and bright on October 15, 1883. From her bedroom window, Olivia could see ranch hands and townspeople already arriving, carrying dishes for the wedding feast and helping to arrange chairs in the large yard where the ceremony would take place. Catherine bustled in, already dressed in a handsome blue gown, her excitement palpable. "It's going to be perfect," she declared, laying out Olivia's wedding dress with reverent hands. "The weather is cooperating, the flowers look beautiful, and Thomas says Xavier is so nervous he could barely eat breakfast." Olivia laughed, finding comfort in the thought that Xavier, too, felt the significance of the day. "Is Emma still with Mrs. Jensen?" "Yes, and being thoroughly spoiled with attention," Catherine assured her. "She'll be brought up when it's time to dress her for the ceremony." The next hours passed in a blur of preparations, bathing, arranging her hair in an elegant style adorned with small white flowers, donning the sage green silk dress that had arrived from Denver just days before. Catherine chattered happily throughout, her natural warmth and enthusiasm calming Olivia's nerves. By 11 o'clock, Olivia stood before the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. The dress fit perfectly, highlighting her slender figure while remaining appropriate for a ranch wedding. Her hair shone in the sunlight streaming through the window, and her cheeks were flushed with anticipation. "You look radiant," Catherine said softly, coming to stand beside her. "Truly beautiful." "Thank you," Olivia replied, smoothing the silk skirt with suddenly trembling hands. "For everything, your help, your acceptance, your kindness." Catherine squeezed her hand. "We're family now, or will be in about an hour," she added with a smile. "Speaking of which, it's nearly time. Are you ready to become Mrs. Lockwood?" "More than ready," Olivia assured her. There was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Jensen appeared with Emma, dressed in a tiny white gown that matched her mother's wedding dress in style. The baby had grown noticeably in the weeks since their return from Denver, her cheeks round and her eyes bright with interest in her surroundings. "Someone wanted to see her mama before the ceremony," Mrs. Jensen said, passing Emma to Olivia. "She's been an angel all morning." Olivia cradled her daughter close, inhaling her sweet baby scent. "Hello, my love," she whispered. "Today's a special day for all of us." Emma cooed in response, reaching up to pat Olivia's cheek with one tiny hand as if offering encouragement. The simple gesture brought tears to Olivia's eyes, tears of gratitude for this precious child who had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. "It's time," Thomas announced, appearing in the doorway. He had agreed to escort Olivia down the aisle in the absence of her father. His expression softened as he took in the sight of her. "You look beautiful, Olivia. My brother is a fortunate man." "I'm the fortunate one," Olivia replied, passing Emma back to Mrs. Jensen, who would carry her during the ceremony. The walk from the house to the yard where guests had gathered seemed both endless and too short. Olivia's hand rested on Thomas's arm, drawing strength from his steady presence as they approached the floral arch where Reverend Collins and Xavier waited. And then she saw him, Xavier, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to wonder as their eyes met. In that moment, everything else faded away: the guests, the decorations, even the music being played by a trio from Cedar City. There was only Xavier, watching her approach with a look of such profound love that Olivia's heart seemed to expand within her chest. When they reached the arch, Thomas placed her hand in Xavier's, then stepped aside. Xavier's fingers tightened around hers, warm and reassuring. "You're breathtaking," he whispered for her ears alone. Olivia smiled up at him, all nervousness vanishing in the certainty of his love. "So are you." Reverend Collins began the ceremony, his voice clear and strong as he spoke of commitment, partnership, and the sacred bond of marriage. When it came time for the vows, Xavier's voice never wavered as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Olivia for all the days of his life. Olivia's own vows were spoken from the depths of her heart, a pledge to stand by his side through whatever the future might hold. "And now," Reverend Collins said, his smile warm as he addressed the gathered guests, "Mr. Lockwood would like to make an additional commitment." Xavier turned slightly, nodding to Mrs. Jensen, who stepped forward with Emma in her arms. Taking the baby gently, Xavier held her so the gathering could see her clearly. "Today, I not only take Olivia as my wife," he said, his voice carrying across the yard, "but I also welcome Emma as my daughter. Before God and this community, I pledge to love and protect her, to guide and support her, to be a true father to her in every way that matters." Tears flowed freely down Olivia's cheeks now, beyond any attempt at composure. This public declaration of love for her daughter, this unequivocal acceptance, meant more to her than any vow Xavier could have made to her alone. Reverend Collins nodded approvingly. "Let all present witness this commitment and support this family in the years to come." He turned back to Xavier and Olivia. "The rings, please." Thomas stepped forward with the simple gold bands they had chosen together. Xavier slipped his mother's wedding ring, the same one Olivia had worn as a pretense during their Denver trip, onto her finger, this time with the full weight of his vows behind it. Olivia placed a matching band on his finger, her hand steady despite the emotion overwhelming her. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Collins declared. "Mr. Lockwood, you may kiss your bride." Xavier handed Emma back to Mrs. Jensen, then turned to Olivia, cradling her face in his hands as if she were made of the finest porcelain. His kiss was gentle yet affirming, a promise and a celebration. When they separated, the applause from the guests seemed to echo the joy in Olivia's heart. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reverend Collins announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Xavier Lockwood and their daughter, Emma Lockwood." The celebration that followed was everything Xavier had hoped for: a true community gathering that left no doubt about Olivia's position as his wife and Emma's legitimacy as their daughter. Even those who had been most judgmental of Olivia's past seemed to recognize that a new chapter had begun, one that deserved to be honored regardless of what had come before. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a warm glow over the remaining guests. The musicians played a slow waltz, and Xavier led Olivia onto the makeshift dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. "Are you happy, Mrs. Lockwood?" he asked as they moved together in perfect rhythm. "Completely," Olivia replied, her eyes shining in the lantern light. "I never imagined such happiness was possible." Xavier drew her closer, his arms secure around her waist. "This is only the beginning," he promised. "We have a lifetime ahead of us, years to build this ranch, to raise Emma, perhaps to give her brothers and sisters one day." Olivia's heart leaped at the thought. "I would like that," she admitted softly, "to fill this house with children, with laughter." "As would I," Xavier agreed, his eyes warm with promise. "But first, I intend to enjoy being a husband to you, Olivia. To show you every day how grateful I am that you chose to share your life with me." As the dance ended, they were joined by Thomas and Catherine, who had Emma in her arms once more. The baby was growing sleepy, her eyes heavy despite the excitement around her. "I think someone's ready for bed," Catherine observed, passing Emma to Olivia. "And perhaps the bride and groom might be ready to retire as well. It's been a long day." Olivia felt her cheeks warm at the gentle suggestion, but Xavier nodded, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that had become familiar and comforting. "We'll say our good nights," he agreed, "though the celebration should continue for those who wish to stay." After bidding farewell to their guests, they made their way to the house, Xavier carrying the now sleeping Emma while Olivia gathered her skirts to climb the porch steps. In the nursery, they worked together to change Emma into her nightgown and settle her in the cradle. "Sleep well, little one," Xavier whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Dream of horses and stars." Olivia watched from the doorway, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. This man who had first defended her against gossip, who had offered her honest work when others turned her away, who had proven through action rather than words that she was indeed fit to be a mother, he was now her husband, Emma's father, the center of the life they would build together. When Xavier joined her, closing the nursery door softly behind him, his expression was tender as he gazed down at her. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing the question he had posed the night before. In answer, Olivia rose on tiptoe to kiss him, pouring into the gesture all the love and gratitude and joy that words seemed insufficient to express. Xavier's arms encircled her, drawing her close as the kiss deepened, a promise of the night to come and the lifetime that would follow. "No regrets," Olivia whispered against his lips. "Only gratitude for the day you stood in the street of Tropic and declared you would prove them wrong with me." Xavier smiled, his eyes reflecting the certainty in her own heart. "And so we have," he murmured. "So we have." 5 years later, the Lockwood Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the region. The herd had grown to over 500 head of cattle, and the main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. Emma, now a spirited 5-year-old with her mother's honey-brown hair and her father's determined nature, had been joined by 3-year-old twins, James and Sarah, and 6-month-old Matthew. The community of Tropic had changed as well. Thomas had indeed opened a second store in the town, bringing new business and opportunities. With the Lockwood brothers' influence, the small settlement had grown into a more tolerant, forward-thinking place. Even Mrs. Walsh had eventually softened her stance, particularly after Xavier donated generously to build a new schoolhouse and named it in honor of Olivia's father. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Xavier surprised Olivia with a special gift, the deed to the ranch, officially registered with both their names as equal owners. "It's as much your creation as mine," he told her as they sat on the porch swing watching Emma teach the twins how to feed the chickens, baby Matthew sleeping contentedly in Olivia's arms. "More, perhaps. You've made this place a true home." Olivia leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she had once thought impossible. "We did it together," she corrected gently, "just as we promised." Xavier's arm tightened around her shoulders as Emma's laughter rang out across the yard, followed by the twins' enthusiastic attempts to imitate their big sister. "They said you weren't fit to be a mother," Xavier remarked, his voice holding a hint of the old indignation. "Look at her now, look at all of them. They couldn't have been more wrong." Olivia smiled, watching as Emma patiently showed James how to scatter the feed without frightening the hens. At 5, she was already showing signs of the woman she would become: kind, capable, with the quiet strength that came from growing up secure in the knowledge she was loved. "Sometimes," Olivia said thoughtfully, "being told you can't do something is exactly the motivation needed to prove that you can, especially when you have the right person believing in you." Xavier pressed a kiss to her temple, his voice soft with emotion as he replied, "And I'll never stop believing in you, Olivia Lockwood, not for a single day of our lives together." As the sun began its descent behind the red cliffs, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, Olivia closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of gratitude. For Xavier's steadfast love, for their beautiful children, for the life they had built together against all odds. The town had said she wasn't fit to be a mother. A cowboy had said he'd prove them wrong with her, and together they had.